The scream ripped through the farmhouse like glass shattering, sharp and raw, leaving Emily clutching her chest as her breath caught in her throat. The sound wasn't only pain, it was soaked in terror, broken as if forced past a mouthful of blood. Emily whispered, "Who's there?" But her voice barely carried in the stale, icy air. The sound dissolved into silence so complete the crickets refused to answer, leaving only her pounding heartbeat. Then came the dragging, slow, rhythmic, a heavy weight pulled across warped wood. The smell of rusted iron drifted, thick with the metallic tang of blood. Emily froze, her eyes locked on the farmhouse doorway where the shadows pressed like living things. The boards creaked under unseen weight, and then, cutting through the silence, a whisper curled into the night. The voice was hoarse, deliberate, each syllable breaking the stillness. It said her name. Emily jolted awake in her own bed, drenched in sweat, the scream echoing like a memory that didn't belong. She gasped, clutching the sheets, certain she had dreamed, yet her body shook as though she had lived it. The room was dark, only the pale glow of the streetlight spilling through half-drawn blinds. She whispered, "It wasn't real," forcing the words into the silence, yet they rang hollow. A faint sound crept from the wall, a dragging scratch, soft and steady. Emily froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Slowly her eyes adjusted, revealing the faintest lines etched into the plaster, strokes she swore had not been there before. She reached out with trembling fingers, but pulled back as the scratching stopped. The silence was worse, pressing close around her. She whispered again, "Please, stop." Emily leaned forward, eyes wide as she traced the faint scratches in the plaster with her gaze. The lines curved jaggedly, almost deliberate, each stroke biting deeper than the last. She whispered, "Who's doing this?" But her voice cracked and faltered. Her phone sat on the nightstand, its screen black, as if waiting to be touched. She hesitated, unable to look away from the markings. The scratching resumed louder, a steady rasp of something sharp digging closer. Emily recoiled, pulling her knees to her chest, her breath shallow. The sound suddenly ceased, replaced by silence so deep she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. When she dared to look again, a new line had appeared, long and unbroken, cutting toward where her head had rested on the pillow. Emily stumbled from the bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She reached the wall, her hand hovering just inches from the scratches. Her breath shook as she whispered, "It's my name?" The grooves were clearer now, carved with precision, each letter cutting deep into the plaster. The word Emily stretched across the wall, uneven but unmistakable. She staggered back, nearly tripping over the rug, her body trembling as fear rooted her in place. A gust of air slipped through the half-open window, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. The blinds rattled softly, yet the letters seemed to pulse in the shifting light. Emily clutched her head, whispering, "This isn't real, this can't be real." But the wall stood unyielding, her name carved into its very bones. Emily pressed her back against the opposite wall, her eyes locked on the carved letters. Her breath came in rapid bursts, every exhale sharp in the silence. She fumbled for her phone, the screen lighting up her pale face, but the signal bar flickered dead. A message box opened on its own, the cursor blinking, waiting. The scratches resumed, faint but steady, shaping another line beneath her name. She whispered, "No, please, don't." Her voice cracked into a sob. Slowly, the letters formed the words, "I see you." Emily dropped the phone, the sound loud against the wood, but she couldn't look away. The air thickened, colder than before, pressing down on her chest. The silence that followed was worse than the words, for it promised something yet to come. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, arms wrapped tight around her knees, as the morning light seeped reluctantly through the blinds. Her thoughts twisted back to the scratches, replaying them with merciless clarity. She whispered, "It wasn't a dream." The apartment felt smaller than ever, as though the walls leaned closer with each breath she took. She could still feel the cold pressing against her chest, the whisper echoing her name in the silence. The faint smell of damp earth still clung to her clothes, though she hadn't left her room. She thought of her childhood nights when she had begged her mother to leave a light on, because the dark felt alive. Emily's phone buzzed suddenly on the nightstand, jolting her. The message was blank, nothing but a white screen glowing back at her, as if the world itself was mocking her with emptiness. Later that day, Emily sat across from her friend Daniel at a coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup, though she barely drank. Daniel leaned back, skepticism etched in his face. "You're scaring yourself," he said, forcing a laugh. Emily stared into the dark liquid, her reflection trembling with every ripple. "It's real, Daniel. I saw my name carved into the wall," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, running a hand through his short hair. "Old houses creak, plaster cracks. You're exhausted." Emily wanted to believe him, but the way the scratches had spelled her name replayed in her mind. She clenched her jaw, wishing he could have seen it, wishing the silence of her bedroom had devoured him too. Daniel's smile faltered when he noticed how pale she had become. He leaned forward, whispering, "You really believe this, don't you?" Emily walked home in the early evening, the streets bathed in dusky blue. The city buzzed, yet she felt utterly detached, moving like a ghost among the living. Every window she passed reflected her figure, pale and stretched, as though mocking her fear. A child's laughter echoed across the street, sharp against her raw nerves. She paused near an alley, certain she had heard her name whispered from its shadows. "Emily," the voice croaked, hoarse and unmistakable. Her body stiffened, her breath locked in her throat. She spun, staring into the darkness, but no one stood there. The passing crowd moved on, oblivious, their faces blank blurs against her terror. Emily whispered to herself, "It's following me." She gripped her bag tightly and quickened her pace, praying the voices would not cross her doorstep tonight. When Emily returned home, she froze at the bedroom doorway. Fresh grooves marked the plaster wall, deep and jagged, cutting across her name as though someone had tried to claw it out. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. "It happened again," she muttered, her voice fragile. The scratches had multiplied, spreading outward like roots burrowing through the wall. She stepped closer, her trembling hand reaching for the cool plaster. Her phone buzzed, vibrating violently on the nightstand. She picked it up with shaking fingers, the screen glowing with a message that read, "You can't hide." Her breath cracked into a sob, the phone slipping from her grasp. It landed face down, the vibration echoing like a pulse against the wooden floor. The silence after was suffocating, pressing into her chest like hands she couldn't see. That night, Emily sat alone at her kitchen table, head in her hands. The sound of the refrigerator's hum was the only noise, yet her nerves jolted at every creak of the pipes. Then came a knock at the door, 3 slow taps. She lifted her head, pulse racing. At the threshold stood a man in a long dark coat, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "You've seen it," he said softly, his voice thick with certainty. Emily stepped back, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, only lifted a finger to the air as though silencing unseen voices. "It knows your name. It always begins with a name," he whispered. Before she could reply, he turned, vanishing into the night. Emily stood trembling in the doorway, the echo of his words rooting deep in her fear. Emily sat across from Detective Harris in his cluttered office, the smell of stale coffee clinging to the air. He leaned forward, brow furrowed, as she recounted every detail of the scratches and the whisper. "Names on walls don't just appear," Harris muttered, his voice heavy with disbelief. Emily clenched her fists, her eyes burning with frustration. "I'm not imagining this. I need help before it gets worse." Harris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll check it out, but you've got to understand. Things like this usually have an explanation." Emily whispered, "And what if it doesn't?" The silence stretched between them, his skepticism grinding against her desperation. For the first time, she saw the weariness in his eyes, a man haunted by truths he wasn't ready to admit. Later that evening, Harris followed Emily into her bedroom. The carved letters on the wall glared back under the beam of his flashlight. His jaw tightened, the skepticism cracking slightly. "That's Deliberate, he muttered. Emily nodded, her arms crossed tightly. I told you. He traced one groove with gloved fingers, frowning. No forced entry, no signs of anyone being here. Yet this is carved deep. Emily shivered, hugging herself. It happens when I'm asleep. I wake up, and there's more. Harris exhaled sharply, stepping back as though the wall itself pushed him away. This isn't normal damage, he admitted quietly. The carved letters seemed to mock him, daring him to explain what he could not. Emily whispered, "Now do you believe me?" Across the street, Mrs. Turner stood at her window, her frail hands gripping the curtain as she watched Emily's apartment. The elderly neighbor had lived there for decades, yet she had never seen anything like the flickering shadows moving inside Emily's room. Her lips trembled as she whispered a prayer under her breath. Suddenly the shadow shifted, stretching unnaturally across the wall, spelling out Emily's name in darkness. Mrs. Turner gasped, clutching her chest. No, not again. She staggered back, nearly knocking over a lamp, her breath shallow. The shadows dissolved as though they had never been there. From her window she saw nothing but the still glow of Emily's apartment. Mrs. Turner whispered, "It's starting again," her voice breaking under the weight of memory. Detective Harris sat in his car outside Emily's building, the engine idling as he flipped through old case files. The pages revealed reports of unexplained markings, names carved into walls, whispers that drove victims to madness. His hand trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his worn face. "I've seen this before," he muttered, though he hated admitting it. He remembered the photographs from years ago. Different towns, different victims, but always the same carvings. The cases had ended without answers, filed away as delusions. Harris clenched his jaw, realizing how dangerously close Emily's story mirrored them. The smoke curled upward, mixing with his dread. For the first time, doubt gnawed through his skepticism, and he feared what waited for her next. Emily lay awake in her darkened bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed like a weight until the whisper came again, softer this time, curling through the air like smoke. "Emily." Her breath caught, her body stiff. She turned her head slowly toward the wall. Fresh scratches emerged, the sound a slow, deliberate rasp, each stroke cutting deeper into the plaster. She whimpered, clutching her blanket to her chest. The letters spelled her name again, this time larger, bolder, as though shouting without sound. She whispered, "Please stop," tears streaking her face. The whisper grew louder, repeating her name over and over, overlapping until it sounded like a chorus of voices clawing at her sanity. Emily pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices seeped through, relentless and merciless. Emily sat in her living room with Sarah, her closest friend since childhood, clutching a mug that had gone cold in her hands. "You have to believe me," Emily pleaded, her voice shaking. Sarah frowned, her brow furrowed as she leaned forward. "You've been under so much stress, Em. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks." Emily shook her head violently, tears spilling. "No," I heard it whispering, and I saw the words carved into the wall. Sarah's expression softened, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "Then let me see it for myself," she said. Emily hesitated, fear pulsing through her veins, but finally nodded. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." The silence stretched heavy between them, each of them knowing that whatever they would face upstairs might not let them leave unchanged. Emily led Sarah into the bedroom, her hands trembling as she flipped on the light. The wall bore her name carved deep, each letter jagged and darkened with fresh grooves. Sarah gasped, stepping back as her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, Emily," she whispered. Emily's voice cracked. "Do you believe me now?" Sarah's eyes darted over the room, then back to Emily. "Who else knows about this?" Emily shook her head. "Just the detective. He doesn't want to admit it, but he's seen it." Sarah swallowed hard, her fear barely masked by calm words. "Then you need to get out before it spreads." The word, spreads, made Emily's skin crawl as if the carvings were alive, reaching for her. She whispered, "It already has." Hours later, Emily sat alone with a leather-bound journal Sarah had found hidden in the basement beneath rotting floorboards. The pages reeked of mildew, filled with sketches of walls covered in names. Each entry described voices calling from the dark, pulling people deeper into madness. One passage caught Emily's breath. It begins with the name carved and ends when the walls consume them. Her hand shook as she flipped the brittle page, the ink smudged and frantic. She whispered, "They knew. Someone else lived this." A chill slithered through the room, carrying with it the faint scrape of nails against plaster. Emily snapped the book shut, heart pounding. The journal had not been left for her to find by accident. It was a warning, and she was already too deep to escape. Emily's eyes darted to the wall as a new line etched itself slowly into the plaster. She whispered, "No, not again," pressing her back against the dresser. The groove deepened, curling into words she could barely form aloud. "Get out." She staggered closer, her pulse racing, as the message seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering as though stirred by an unseen hand. Emily covered her ears, but the scraping sound burrowed deep inside her skull, louder with every second. She dropped to her knees, whispering through tears, "What do you want from me?" The answer came in silence, but the words on the wall burned their intent clear. It wanted her gone, but where could she run? That night, Sarah returned, her face pale, but her eyes set with resolve. "I told Daniel everything," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Emily's heart sank. "You did what?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "He needed to know. You can't fight this alone." Emily's stomach twisted, a wave of betrayal crushing her chest. "I trusted you," she whispered. Sarah looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I just want to help." The room grew colder, the words on the wall glowing faintly in the dim light, as though feeding on the tension between them. Emily's fists clenched, her tears blinding her. "You don't understand. By telling him, you brought him into this. Now none of us are safe." The silence afterward was broken only by the faint scratch beginning again in the walls. Emily sat in the dim attic, dust swirling as she pried open a rusted trunk that had belonged to her late grandmother. Inside were brittle papers, photographs, and a deed revealing the farmhouse had been in her family for generations. Her fingers shook as she traced the name on the document, her mother's maiden name tied directly to the property. "It was ours," Emily whispered, her throat dry. She stared at a black and white photograph of the house, its walls already scarred with faint carvings. The truth slithered into her chest like ice. This was not random, not chance. The farmhouse had always belonged to her bloodline. She clutched the photo tighter, a sob breaking free. "It chose me," she said, realizing the horror was not haunting her by accident. It was calling her home. Later that evening, Emily met with a survivor named Mark at a small roadside diner. His hand shook as he stirred cold coffee, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "I lived through it once," Mark said, his voice raw. "But it never really leaves." Emily leaned forward, desperate. "What did it want from you?" Mark's lips trembled as he spoke. "Names are the beginning. Once it has you, it carves deeper until there's nothing left." Emily's stomach churned as his words cut like knives. "How did you escape?" she asked. Mark's gaze shifted to the window, refusing to meet her eyes. "You don't escape, you survive, broken hollow, waiting for it to return." Emily's hands tightened around her mug, the hopelessness in his words crushing her last fragile thread of denial. Back at her apartment, Emily stared into the mirror, her reflection fractured by a crack running across the glass. For the first time, she noticed faint scratches appearing not just on her wall, but in the reflection behind her. "It's me," she whispered, horrified. Her fingers brushed the surface as letters formed in the mirror's reflection, spelling her name backward as though the glass itself bled. Her heart thundered, and she staggered back, clutching her mouth. The journal's words rang in her mind, "It begins with the name." Emily realized the carvings weren't warnings. They were bindings, pulling her closer to something that had chosen her long before she was born. Tears blurred her sight as she whispered, "It's inside me now." The reflection smiled when she didn't. Emily returned to Detective Harris, slamming the journal on his desk. "It's not just haunting me, it's tied to my family." Harris opened the book, flipping through frantic sketches of names etched into walls. His jaw tightened as he recalled similar case files. "This thing doesn't stop," he muttered. Emily's eyes burned with anger. "Then, help me end it." Harris leaned back, his face pale. "You can't end it, Emily. The best you can do is survive." She shook her head violently, her voice breaking. "No, it wants me, and I won't let it take anyone else." Harris looked at her, seeing not just fear but a fragile spark of resolve. "Be careful what you wish for," he said, sliding the journal back to her with trembling hands. That night, Emily awoke to find new words carved beneath her name on the bedroom wall. Her breath froze as she read them. "Welcome home." The letters dripped fresh plaster dust onto the floor, as if carved moments before. Emily backed away, trembling. "No," she whispered. Her phone vibrated, a notification flashing across the screen, a photo of the farmhouse she had never taken. Her pulse pounded as she realized the entity wasn't waiting for her to return. It was dragging her closer with every mark. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. The walls seemed to close in, whispering her name from every corner. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the words echoed louder, relentless, drawing her deeper into the darkness of her family's legacy. Emily woke to the sound of her name whispered inches from her ear. She bolted upright, her chest heaving, only to see fresh carvings etching themselves into the plaster in real time. The scratches glowed faintly, shimmering like embers as each letter burned into place. "Stop!" she screamed, slamming her fists against the wall. The whisper echoed her cry, mocking her with her own voice. Her lamp flickered violently, shadows twisting into elongated shapes that crawled across the floor. Emily's breath fogged in the cold air, her skin prickling with dread as the room grew smaller, suffocating. Her reflection in the cracked mirror grinned when she did not. She clutched her head, whispering, "It's inside my house." The walls groaned, bending inward as if the apartment itself was alive, pressing closer to swallow her whole. The air warped as the walls twisted like flesh, the room bending into unnatural angles. Emily staggered, gripping the dresser to steady herself, but the wood pulsed like a heartbeat beneath her hand. No, this isn't real," she whispered, tears streaking her face. Her belongings shook violently, drawers sliding open, clothes spilling onto the floor as if flung by invisible hands. A chair slammed against the wall, splintering into pieces. The plaster cracked wider, exposing black voids that breathed cold air into the room. Emily backed away, her knees trembling, the journal lying open at her feet. Its pages flipped on their own, landing on a phrase scrawled in frantic ink, "The house devours." She screamed as her own name stretched across every wall, multiplying until the room pulsed with it, swallowing every inch of space. Detective Harris stood at his office window, staring into the night when his phone buzzed. The photo made his blood run cold. Emily's walls covered in her name, dozens of times over. He grabbed his coat, muttering, "Not again." Driving through empty streets, he replayed old cases in his mind, the victims who had vanished without a trace. His hands gripped the wheel tightly as sweat dripped down his temple. Arriving at her building, he burst inside, flashlight ready, his heart hammering. He shouted, "Emily!" But the air swallowed his voice. The hallway lights flickered, then went dark, leaving only his beam cutting through the gloom. He froze as whispers slithered from the walls, not just calling Emily's name, but his. The sound wrapped around him, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Emily collapsed to the floor as the whisper crescendoed into a chorus, her name shouted from every corner. She pressed her palms to her ears, but the voices pierced through. Harris burst into the room, his flashlight cutting through the chaos. "Emily!" he yelled, rushing to her side. She lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice trembling. "It's everywhere. You can't stop it." Harris aimed the beam at the walls, seeing her name carved endlessly, overlapping until the plaster bled dust. His throat tightened as he muttered, "Dear God." The floor shook violently, objects levitating before slamming down again. Emily clutched his sleeve desperately, whispering, "Don't let it take me." He pulled her closer, though his own body trembled, as the apartment groaned like something alive, waiting to consume them both. The room erupted in screams, though no mouths spoke. The walls split open, revealing darkness that pulsed like a living thing. Emily clung to Harris as the void expanded, pulling at their bodies with invisible force. The journal flew across the room, slamming against the wall as words burned across its open page. "You belong." Emily screamed, her nails digging into the detective's arm. Harris shouted, "Hold on," but his voice was drowned in the roar of the house. Furniture lifted and shattered in midair, glass exploding into shards. Emily's name blazed across the walls like fire, the letters twisting into shapes that no human tongue could form. The void yawned wider, dragging them both toward its center. Emily cried, "It's too late," as the darkness swallowed the last flicker of light. The silence after the collapse was suffocating. Emily opened her eyes slowly. Lying sprawled on the wooden floor, the void sealed as if it had never existed. The air was still, heavy with dust, and the walls stood cracked but intact. Harris groaned beside her, clutching his ribs. Emily whispered, "It stopped." But her voice faltered as her gaze lifted. Her name still stretched across the plaster, dozens of times, carved so deep they seemed to bleed shadows. The words no longer moved, yet their presence pressed on her chest like chains. Harris coughed, his voice low. "We're still here." Emily sat up, her body trembling, her hands stained with dust. She whispered again, "For how long?" Her voice dissolved into silence, unanswered by the oppressive room that seemed to breathe around them. Emily sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The city lights flickered faintly, but her reflection in the glass haunted her more. Her eyes were hollow, her face thinner, her skin pale as though drained by the night. Harris sat across the room, head in his hands, muttering under his breath. Emily whispered, "It's not over." Harris raised his tired gaze, his expression grim. "It never is," he said. A cold draft slipped through the cracks in the window, curling around them like unseen fingers. The apartment felt wrong, familiar but no longer safe. Emily pressed her palm against the glass, the chill seeping into her bones. Behind her reflection, faint words appeared etched in the window pane. "Stay." She pulled her hand back, heart hammering, the letters glowing faintly before fading into nothing. Days passed, yet Emily never left her apartment. Harris visited, bringing food, but the fear never eased. At night, the whispers returned, softer, not shouting her name but coaxing, lulling, as if inviting her closer. She lay in bed, eyes wide, whispering, "I hear you." The walls no longer cracked, but the carvings darkened, absorbing the light like charred wounds. Harris warned, "You can't listen to it," but his voice trembled as though he too had begun to hear the pull. Emily pressed her hands over her chest, feeling her heart beat slow whenever the whispers grew stronger. Her body weakened, her skin colder, her eyes glassy. She whispered through the dark, "What do you want from me?" The silence answered with only her name, spoken like a promise she could no longer refuse. One evening Harris pored over the journal again, his hands shaking. He muttered, "Every survivor was marked. No one escaped." Emily stood nearby, her eyes distant, her body swaying as though guided by unseen strings. Harris grabbed her arm, desperate. "Fight it, Emily. Don't let it take you." She turned slowly, her lips parting in a faint smile that wasn't hers. "It already has," she whispered. Harris recoiled, horror etched in his face as he realized her voice had layered tones, two voices speaking as one. The walls groaned, the carvings glowing faintly in rhythm with her words. The journal slipped from his hands, landing open on the floor with the final entry circled. "The last name is theirs." Harris backed away, whispering, "God help us." That night, Emily awoke to silence, the kind that smothered every sound. She turned toward the wall and froze. Beneath the endless carvings of her name, new letters appeared, jagged and deliberate. Harris. Her scream tore through the room as Harris stumbled from his chair, his eyes locking on the wall in disbelief. "No, not me," he muttered, backing away. The whisper filled the air, deeper, stronger, speaking both their names together. Emily clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face. "It's never going to stop," she whispered. The walls pulsed like living skin, the words glowing faintly before fading into shadow. The last sound was a whisper curling through the silence, hoarse and deliberate, calling their names again. The room sank into darkness, leaving only the echo of that voice lingering forever.